As an OG Rust player myself, the game has gone through many changes. Certain key features have altered and changed so much that once put together, the game used to be completely different. Some are very well known and not worth covering too much because I don't want to get boring, so I'll make them brief. For example, yes, I used to play Legacy Rust, and yes, there used to be mutant bears, zombies, different graphics, and building styles, and every time I see this Legacy old Rust, it does ring a special place in my heart. However, I know for a fact that I am speaking from nostalgia and memories more than from a technical point of view. I mean, this is a raid done by Mike the Vike 9 years ago, and it's not the Rust I would want to play today, but yes, it is nostalgic. But it's not the only thing I'm talking about. Stuff like third person or this old map that you used to just have to draw on to navigate, and tons of other things. Those are the OG stuff I'm talking about. Stuff that changed the era of Rust, pre-vehicle Rust to post-vehicle Rust, and how you'd play the game. I'm going for your nostalgia here.
Should I equip shotgun now or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I've got eyes on 2 on the roof.
Now, while these are notable and massive changes from then, they are not exactly what I'm talking about for the sake of this video. Instead, I am aiming more direct, trying to unlock some of your core memories, perhaps. For example, remember third person being a normal thing? You just pressed F3 and you're good to go. Yeah. I'm talking about Rust when they were still experimenting a lot, and to some degree Rust still does that, but the earlier you go, the more experimental the game felt. It's still a game more recognizable to the version we play today, unlike Legacy, but it's very distinct. Though the third person feature was in the game for only a short period of time, being added and restricted within a year of itself. Originally everyone could do it, but then it got restricted so only admins or server devs could perform the action, and it was so brief and so long ago that it's actually nearly impossible to find footage. Unless you look at some of the old Rust YouTubers during that time making their own little videos, you'll see them use it, but it's hard to find specific footage of maybe a bug abuse or what its advantages or disadvantages were. However, of course, you could peek around walls and could even glitch into bases, because there was a Reddit post I found where by sleeping near the base and then getting up in third person, you could find yourself on the other side. Not everyone was really happy about the feature, and I can obviously understand why. Third person doesn't really have a place in Rust, and it was promptly removed anyways. You can see people hating it in a Reddit thread and then people happy once it was officially removed. Another thing is the XP system. It's kind of something really funny to think about now, but yes, there was an XP system that Rust did introduce, and I'm sure a lot of you do remember it. They eventually removed it later, obviously, but the XP system would be a literal level up system, and you would unlock things based off of your level in the bottom left corner here. You'd level up by hitting ore, killing animals, etc., but it was way more complex than that. If I unlocked a pickaxe and someone else killed me for that pickaxe, it would still have my name on it, in quotations, and as they earned XP using my pickaxe, I would actually get a small cut of that going towards my character's level. This means if I rushed, let's say, the pickaxe blueprint and were able to craft them at mass and then hand them out to a bunch of nakeds, I would have a little minion army going around mining using my pickaxe as I leveled up at the fastest rate within the server. Some people actually liked the XP system, and it had some amount of bonuses, but I personally remember when I came back to Rust and had this XP system, I hated it. I'm one of the ones that really disliked this change, and eventually Facepunch themselves did say that it wasn't the direction they wanted to take Rust in, and backtracked, eventually completely removing it and changing the way they wanted to move forward with the game. Thankfully, I again just didn't like it. Another thing only OGs will remember is sheet metal versus stone walls and their different values back in the day. Everyone knows upgrading in Rust at this point, and generally it's pretty straightforward now, wood to stone to metal to armored. There are some nuances, but you know, it's somewhat linear here. In 2015 it wasn't really that simple, and it wasn't a linear graph. It was actually often better to upgrade and remain at the stone tier. Now the values and changes to everything over the years have been immense. However, back then sheet metal was more resistant to tool damage, bullet damage, and it concealed damaged walls to hide weak spots from players. It also offered more stability. However, it was actually more vulnerable to explosives and generally weak against rockets and grenades. It even had less health overall, meaning almost everyone simply made stone bases over anything else just to be more explosive resistant. I remember literally having a core memory in my brain, wasting an entire night with my friend, upgrading my base from stone to metal, only to realize all these stats when I watched a testing video back in the day. It ruined my night. I literally remember it perfectly. Another thing is, prior to 2018, Rust didn't have the now infamous M249.
In a surprising addition, the Rust team has introduced the new M249 weapon. This thing is deadly and really fun to use,
which is obviously a powerful and meta endgame weapon. Funny enough, the M249 used to be craftable via the research table. Considering its strength, people might not look at this memory very fondly. Zergs were a lot stronger when one person could supply the army with endless amounts of M249s. Funny enough, this actually lasted until 2020. That's when Facepunch decided to change M249s to only be obtainable and no longer craftable. But OGs definitely remember crafting their M249s. And one more funny little thing is that just this past June, they did make the handmade LMG as of recently with that combat upgrade, but of course that's something completely different. Another thing you need to be OG to remember is a time before traps. The shotgun trap was added on May 18th, 2017. But if we dive further back before that time, the era before traps in general is quite a funny era. Now, what I'm referring to are things like trap bases. I know they became more meta, but they've always existed even before quote-unquote traps. This is a trap base that existed before traps. It was quite simple. You can see it here. Not to mention, raiding was also kind of hilarious because it was before the shotgun trap, and sure, there were turrets, but there's no electricity system, none of the nook and crannies, so offline raiding was kind of free. And I get it, today offline raiding is still a lot easier than online raiding, and arguably a lot more boring, but thanks to Partially Royale with a video over 7 years ago, we can truly see how atrocious it was from the past. It was just find an empty base, rocket it, take the stuff, and move on. And funny enough, it was also well before the vehicle and horse era, meaning the only thing to be scared about were surrounding Zergs or solos or nakeds hearing the sound cues and all rushing around with their little feet come into your area. Now, to some extent it was fun because you try to get into the base quick and then all the sound cues would have other people coming in on their feet and you'd start kind of fighting. You'd start defending the base that you're raiding, but you're just defending it for yourself. And I mean, this still does happen, don't get me wrong, but there's another layer when there's traps behind you or on the other side, and you have, of course, helicopters and horses, meaning people can rush to you way faster, meaning you're not already deep in the base, etc., etc. It is a different era of Rust, and I believe if you're listening to me and you have your memories right now in your head playing, you're pretty much an OG player because you get me. Even without much explanation, you get me. Now, a much smaller change, but something that we probably don't think about anymore, is the addition to teams, or more importantly, the gameplay before we could make teams in the game. Literally, I remember yelling, "Is that you crossing?" when we're too far away from one another. Team killing was not uncommon, and regardless of what people say, it's a nice thing to have. Some argued it was more hardcore before. It was just not fun for the gameplay that Rust perpetuates. Spawning into a new server with your friend and having to find each other was also a wild time. Nowadays, you get a nice little green dot on your map, making it nice and easy. Speaking of which, another thing, your map was not always a given. OGs will remember having to craft your map. Not only that, but this is also how it looked like. You'd have to mark your way around, and if you got killed and someone picked up your map, they'd have access to it normally. So if I wanted to mark my home, and you'd put yourself in grave danger of dying, someone could pick up your map and see the home that you marked. Now, you also could set up some ambushes and traps. Crazy how these subtle changes though absolutely craft the Rust experience and the way the entire game is handled, played, and approached, right? I can't bait people with a fake map anymore, but you could in the past. I mentioned it briefly, of course, but OGs will also remember the days before vehicles, and to be honest, this does off-track our list a bit because only OGs will remember one more era of Rust. Batching things together a bit, I'm going to be calling this the territory area, and it's the most obscure one. It sounds weird, but what I'm referring to is a time before the bandit camp, oil rig, water, submarine loot, before vehicles, and before most monuments, of course, outside the dome. One more thing, by the way, the dome jump. You know, OGs are going to remember the dome jump where we all practiced and would still fall through and just completely get angry. And if you were solo, you would just drop to your death and rip all your loot and work. Yeah, rip the dome. It got changed. You used to have to make this dome jump. Now you don't. A little thing I wanted to add to the list. But anyways, I sidetracked a bit. Outside the dome, what I'm referring to are these monuments like Old Dome and whatever was existing around it weren't 100% needed. You didn't even need to get your blue cards and all that stuff. The old times of Rust kind of had an area on where you settled. Think of it this way. If you remember starting a new wipe in old Rust, you would settle in an area, and because you couldn't travel great distances or very far, and you didn't always need to because there wasn't these crazy amounts of loot on oil rig, you didn't need a blue card from one side of the map to use it here and there, blah 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 blah, you could settle in a particular area and play most of the wipe that way. And the strongest beef were everyone in your immediate area. You wouldn't go do oil rig runs or anything in that sort, you just run normal loot spots, mining spots, and then head home. Preparing for a raid, you would almost always target the closest players, especially because dragging loot across the entire map wasn't nearly as feasible without vehicles. Also, just running everywhere would get boring no matter how you cut it. I remember going too far from home for a raid just felt kinda meh. Now this last bit is something fully hard to communicate across, but Rust itself just felt smaller. Simply because wipe to wipe had a central area around your base, and I feel you'd just play around that. Whereas now, no matter what, the map is super interconnected. It could be the trains, the vehicles, the horses for the nakeds, or anything in between. You definitely go more places than ever before, and it is more exciting and it is more engaging, and overall the game is better for it, but I can't lie, it is a completely different feeling from before with the full wilderness, no bandit camp, no safe spots, no nothing, and what it is today. And I appreciate Rust for giving us all these eras, memories, and much more, since I know the game is going to continue to develop into the future.